Welcome to Anti-Federalist Radio, providing you with libertarian perspectives and opinions on current events for the liberty-minded. We are taking the fight to the airwaves as we stand for liberty, oppose tyranny, and give equal opportunity in exposing the hypocrisy of the Democrats and the Republicans. Without further ado, here are your hosts, Joe and Joe.
Hey folks, great to be with you tonight. My name is Joe. I'm your economic host, providing you with over 10 years of economics and market analytics and expertise to give you everything from the libertarian perspective.
And I am also, Joe, your working class Marine Corps veteran and street level activist for the Libertarian Party.
So topics we're going to cover tonight is the big one is that Justin Amash has entered the race for the Libertarian Party presidential nomination. Both Joe and Joe, both of us, will be giving our take on the announcement. The three things that I want to cover is that Amash has mostly just launched an exploratory committee. He has not formally announced, and we'll be discussing on what that means and how that will impact the party's race and nomination for the president. Amash did give a podcast interview, and I listened to that, and I'll give you my take on that. In response to that, Jacob Hornberger has also been launching attacks on Justin Amash, and we'll be providing insights into Jacob's point of view and, to build off of that, going into the kind of the Libertarian Party's response. There seems to be a divide that's developing between the Amash supporters and the others of the Libertarian Party, and what that means for potentially the future of the party, and especially with the 2020 race. And then Joe will be covering another article on the, is it the Ardbury shooting? Is that what it is, Joe?
Ahmaud Arbery. Ahmaud, his name is spelled Ahmaud, last name Arbery.
So the Ahmaud Arbery's death and such. So you'll be given that insight, because that one I'm not very sure on. I've never even heard of it, so that's going to be interesting to give the take on what's going on there. And then lastly, if we've got time, we'll give you the latest economic update in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. So without further ado, let's get on to Justin Amash. So in the last 2 weeks, Justin Amash, who was a former Republican representative inside of Congress, he turned independent about 10 months ago. Within the past 2 weeks, he has made an announcement to seek formally the Libertarian Party's nomination for the president. So he's launched an exploratory committee. He's entered in, and as a matter of fact, there will be a debate hosted by the Libertarian Party of Kentucky that will have several of the top Libertarian candidates, and Justin will be attending. So he seems to more or less unofficially enter into the race for the presidency. Saying that, though, there's been a lot of controversy surrounding Amash. One of them is that Amash doesn't seem to be traditionally libertarian in his views. Although he does have libertarian leanings, he was definitely one of the more liberty-minded Republicans during his stay in office. And he has officially switched his party affiliation to libertarian within the last couple of weeks. But yet one of the challenges and one of the that have been made against Amash is that a lot of what he has been doing is more of an opportunist grab rather than a true conversion. So in other words, some are fearing that the reason why he is making the run for the presidential nomination for the LP party is because of a couple of reasons. One is that he has no outlet to seek re-election as a representative in Michigan, because now that he has been outed and has left the Republican Party, he will likely lose a lot of his former Republican backing. His opposition to Donald Trump has probably made him unpopular inside of the Republican Party. Michigan has been leaning blue in recent years, so it is unlikely that he will generate enough of a Democrat base to cover him. So then their argument goes is that he has nowhere to run politically, So he's running for president as the Libertarian nominee to basically extend his candidacy for one more streak nationally, and we'll see what happens. But for me, I can tell you that when Justin entered the race, I was surprised that he formally entered, but I have been watching him recently, and I can tell you I've been kind of torn on him. There have been times when I've agreed with him, and there have been times when I've disagreed. And I think that kind of represents the Libertarian Party in general, is that there's just a split that's been going on, a divide that's been happening. So I'm in the camp, and I'll speak personally about where who I support. Right now, I was a big Kim Ruff supporter. I thought Kim Ruff was definitely the woman that we needed, the person that we needed, not just because she was a woman, but because she was a person that we needed to represent us and our views in this election cycle. I think that she embodied the spirit and strength of the Libertarian Party, but on a professional level, she was also she had a very impressive resume. She was a director down there, for a major company down in Arizona. She had leadership abilities and skills. She had been very active inside of the Libertarian Party for years. She really had the potential, I think, to make ourselves a strong candidate to make a strong case for the Libertarian Party. When she left, I think there was kind of a power vacuum that has not been filled. And now I think that Justin Amash has sensed that, and he has thrown his hat into the ring, and he is now trying to fill that void, which I personally think that he would make a very strong candidate for the Libertarian Party on a political level, but as on a party platform level, that's the part where I don't know. I don't think he actually embodies the Libertarian Party platform. You might be asking where I'm getting a lot of this, but I'll read to you a couple of Amash's statements to explain why I'm so torn on him. So a few days ago, Amash jumped on a podcast, a Libertarian podcast called, I think it's called 184. And there he gave a great interview. He really did. And basically the Libertarian interviewers were asking Justin, why did he enter the race? Why did he leave the Republican Party? What made him choose the Libertarian Party? And everything else. And so let me go over the good things, and then I'll go over the bad. Good things that I heard from him was that his deconversion, his converting away from the Republicans to the Libertarian Party mirrored my own in a lot of ways. So when you listen to some of our past episodes, I talk and touch on a little bit how I was a former Republican, and I became a Tea Party Republican. I became a staunch conservative. And then I became more of a libertarian conservative, much like Justin Amash and Rand Paul was, fully embracing the libertarian mantra. And that was a process that took over several years. And I had some of the same exact we're getting a couple of sounds in the background. There we go. It seems to have cleared up. I'm getting some of the same – I heard some of the same complaints.
We're actually getting a caller.
Who's calling in? How are we getting a caller?
I will step in.
You got a caller.
And introduce
You
the
got
caller.
a caller. You got me.
We got a caller, and your caller is called Joe. So Joe and Joe, here's
This is
Joe.
getting complicated and confusing.
That's what was throwing me
Yeah,
for a
sounds
loop.
like
That's
George
why
Floyd.
I said, how in the world are we getting a caller? Because I saw Joe, and Joe on there.
Yeah, well, you've got other people named Joe in the world. I'm one of them, and you two are two of them. So I called in because you have a libertarian show, and I'm a libertarian, but then I noticed this is your first show, and you're having problems setting it up. So it's, it's nice to be led on, but I don't really want to interfere with you guys because you've only got about less than 50 minutes left. In any case, I did want to talk about, civil liberties, coronavirus, how it's associated with that. But again, I don't want to interfere with your agenda. I can hold on for another few minutes, if you guys want to continue. If you guys don't get back to me, I'll assume that you want to continue for the rest of the time with the show, with your agenda, and then I'll leave after about 5 minutes. Fair enough?
Sure. But first, before you begin, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Joe?
Yeah. I'm from Montana. I'm a libertarian. That's all you need to know, because we're on the internet, and I don't expose myself to people on the internet.
Not a bad policy. Maybe by the end of
that's
this,
about
the
the most
anonymous
libertarian response I've ever heard in my life.
Maybe by the end of this, the anonymous pen name of all libertarians will be Joe. Maybe we're starting something.
Maybe.
So what's on your mind?
But
what's on your mind, Joe? And do you mind
if
we ask you a couple of questions?
As long as they're not personal, you can ask me about my philosophy. That's fine.
I want to ask you on your take on Justin Amash entering the race.
Well, only thing I know about him is the first time I heard his name just a few seconds ago when you guys were talking about it. But I think anybody who's going to be a libertarian entering the race, with the way the Libertarian Party selects its presidential candidates, is probably a no-show anyway. I'm hoping that the Libertarian Party, I wish it would have straightened itself out since Ron Paul had run back in 2008, and for whom I formed a coalition, but apparently it hasn't. We should have done better by now. We should have, we should have gotten through to people's minds and let them know that civil liberties, at the risk of security, you're really going to lose your civil liberties, and freedom is extremely important. And look where we are now. If Ron Paul had gotten the marketing that he deserved and gotten the media behind him instead of against him, and if Rand Paul actually had more influence in Congress than he does now, maybe, just maybe, we wouldn't have this today. But what I want is, what I'd like to see, and what I tried to do years ago, is to have those particular organizations, freedom-loving organizations, who have a voting bloc, who have a following, they should get together with each other and combine their thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of consumers or followers and form a voting bloc so that we can get more libertarians in there. It doesn't matter who you vote for as a Democrat or Republican outside of Rand Paul and Trump. It doesn't matter. We're still going to go down the road to down the toilet. So that's my personal philosophy about what we're doing now.
If you don't mind me asking, who are you backing in the Libertarian primary?
I'm not backing anybody. Like I said, unless the Libertarian Party restructures itself. Plus, I've known people in the Libertarian Party who, because they were rejected by the Libertarian Party, they started their own candle in the dark, as it were. They thought they could save America by themselves. Libertarians have a great economic, political philosophy, and we need to see that amongst ourselves, stop hurting ourselves like cats, stop acting like kooks, while the Democrats and Republicans act like sophisticated criminals. Apparently, America loves sophisticated criminals more than they love people who are politically astute, but not especially politically savvy. Oh, let me tell you guys while it's on my mind. If you think this show on Blog Talk Radio is going to reach the numbers of people that you think you might reach, you're not. People find Blog Talk shows by accident, not by design. Unless you're going to use Blog Talk in conjunction with other social media. Sorry?
I said that's all right. We're just here for whoever's listening.
All right. Okay. So
I do believe the plan is to open up more social media, and you found it, so that's awesome. So there'll be more to come, I'm sure. After we get the kinks out for starting us off, I think the Libertarian Party needed a voice on Blog Talk Radio, and I'm glad that you found us, Joe.
So,
well,
Joe,
there used to be one years and years ago, but he's off the air now, and I'm glad I found you guys too.
So,
yeah.
Joe, I wanted to tell you that about what you had touched on was saying that we need basically Ron Paul to me was like lightning in a rod. and or lightning in a bottle, not lightning in a rod. He was a lightning rod, all right. He was lightning in a bottle.
Right. I know what
you mean. He was the sole reason why I actually ended up becoming a libertarian. So I don't know if you listened to my opening segment, but I had mentioned just a few minutes right before you called in that Justin Amash is his conversion away from the Republican Party. He had some of the same complaints I had, and he basically moved away. But what moved me away from the Republican Party was Ron Paul himself. When in 2012, when I was listening to Paul speak, it was his top things that he talked about on economics that at that time, I was a student we're in North Carolina, so I was a student at the University of North Carolina in Greensboro, and I was majoring in economics. And he was talking about things that I did not hear about in my classes. It was like these were taboo subjects. He was answering questions that I had that I was not learning from my professors. So I kept asking myself, what in the hell does Ron Paul know that I don't know, and how in the world did he get those answers? And that enabled me to investigate libertarian economics, politics, and philosophy. And I realized over time how right they were. They were very predictive in the way that our society would become in the wake of encroaching government power.
Absolutely. And I don't know who your favorite author is. It could be Rothbard, it could be Mises, but I like Milton Friedman. And Harry Brown was the precursor to Ron Paul. It was because of Harry Brown that probably Ron Paul became who he is, or who he still is. But when people do their investigation, they find out that on both the Democratic side of the aisle and the Republican side of the aisle, there's too much corruption, too much hypocrisy, too much rhetoric to be really taken seriously by people who really have the basic foundation of this is America. We have civil liberties. Government is there to protect us in certain ways, but they're not to encroach upon us. And we are supposed to be allowed to do what we want to do as long as we don't encroach upon the other rights of other Americans. Simple principle. But the Constitution was written in such a way like a prenup agreement with a weasel clause. With that Article 1, Section 8 in there, it's the reason, along with Article 1, Section 7, it is how the Democrats and Republicans get away with what they do. But I'm glad that you did your own independent investigation and found out about Ron. The Ron Paul Institute is, as you know, is online. And Harry Brown, even though he died years ago, he still has his writings online. And they just make plain common sense. I don't know if you like the Cato Institute. I don't like the Mises .org Institute because trying to read their articles is like trying to read the notes from the Federal Reserve. It's almost as though they're written not to be understood.
Right.
But
well, Joe, we appreciate.
Have any more questions?
We appreciate. No, but we appreciate your calling.
Okay.
And thank you for sharing your views with us. This is what we're here for. We're trying to provide ourselves an anchor for libertarian thought and philosophy and discussion. So we thank you for everything that you have contributed to us.
Well, thank you guys too for taking the time to found this Blog Talk show. Hope you guys get all the kinks out, and I'll be back. So take it easy, guys. All right. Be safe.
Please remember to follow the show. You can click on the show page, follow, and then you'll know every time that the show is on in the future. Thank you.
Okay. All righty, guys. Take it easy now. Bye-bye.
All right. So that was Joe from Montana. We apologize for the confusion there.
Minnesota,
between your two hosts, yeah. Joe. What's that?
I think you said Minnesota, but we're rolling with it.
I thought you said Montana.
Well, pretty sure it was Minnesota, but we're rolling with it.
He did say Montana, but I think he likes to be off the grid. So we'll just call him the Joe from the Midwest, the caller Joe.
So we have a ghost Joe. We have a ghost Joe call-in, on a Joe and Joe Libertarian radio show. So go figure that. Now, getting back on to topic and such, so going over what Amash's entrance into the party is, I want to go over a couple of excerpts, and then I will hand this off to Joe for comments, and then we'll move on. So when Amash was asked what was his greatest concerns about what he would do as president, he said this, and I quote from Reason TV. He said, "I want to restore our system of government where the people have representation in Washington, and right now they don't have any representation," unquote. That was his full, concise statement on his belief. In there, I want to touch on this, is that what I noted this, and I noted this in his blog talk, his podcast interview, that Justin Amash seemed more concerned with how government is being governed than with the actual threat of increasing power of government of itself. And so he criticizes the executive authority, that it usurps the legislative authority, but he doesn't outright criticize the growing power that both the executive authority and legislative authorities have over our lives. He criticizes that a few people at the top of the House of Representatives is dictating the conversation to create bills, but he's not really criticizing the content of what the bills that are being created and what they are doing to American lives. And so that's creating, to me, among the hardcore libertarian branch, the big L's, and I would classify myself as more of a moderate medium L. I wouldn't classify myself quite as a classical liberal small L, but he seems to be more of a classical liberal small L, where he is trying to still go through government representation, and that's all well and good. But to me, his criticism seemed to be shallow, the way that our government is being governed and run right now, compared to some of the other libertarian candidates. So now I'm going to hand this off to Joe Swiggett, my counterpart. Joe, I want you to weigh in on this. What do you think about Justin Amash entering the race, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first off, I don't want to ever say anything that is interpreted as discouraging people from the major parties from jumping ship and coming over to our side. I believe politics needs to be a two-way discussion, not a shouting match. And if you're hearing things over here that you like the sound of and it's starting to make sense to you, ask me all the questions you want. And if you start to identify a little bit more with us than with your traditional political leanings, come on over. Said, in the case of Amash, I find it a little hard to believe his sincerity when you're a libertarian for about 30 seconds before you declare your presidential bid. This is not, a nursing home for washed-up Republicans. I am not a Republican, and I am not Republican light, and I am not a 2005 Republican or a Reagan Republican. I'm a libertarian. We'll see what that turns into in the future. It's an interesting opportunity for us to talk about how libertarians select our presidential nominee. Now, we do have primaries, but they're non-binding. And the reason our primaries are non-binding is because Cardi B tomorrow decides that she wants to declare a presidential candidacy and decides to come over to the Libertarian Party. Even if she has no idea what a libertarian is, she has enough social media following that she can convince enough people to register as libertarians, vote in our primary, and our party is still small enough to just be usurped by people. It's a thing that's happened occasionally. I can't remember the names, but there have been people that have competed for the Libertarian presidential nominee purely because they hate libertarians, because it was a troll campaign, it was a joke to them, and that's why our primaries are non-binding. We instead have state conventions where we elect delegates, and then those delegates from each state go to a national convention, and our selected delegates decide on who is going to be our presidential nominee. We still have primaries. They're non-binding. They're very formal polls, essentially. And we, of course, have a campaign season. There are several people campaigning right now for the Libertarian presidential nomination. And that's another one of my frustrations with this, is that we are months and months into our primary. I've already supported a candidate, donated money to their campaign, had them dropped out, shopped around, found another candidate support, and backed them both on the ground and financially. We're so far into this. I mean, I've had, in my own activist efforts on the ground at UNCG, I've had Spike Cohen, Vermin Supreme's running mate. He's come down and he's taken his time to help me on the ground at UNCG and help me try to build a movement, which got completely derailed when classes got dismissed for coronavirus. But that is what it is. So my first impressions of Amash were essentially, this is a Republican who is looking for an opportunity to boost his political career by jumping on the still very small but starting to grow bandwagon of libertarianism. And I don't want this to be another Republican Party, but I decided to look into him and give him a chance. So I looked up his website, Justin Amash's website, amashforamerica.com. And I'm going to read some things. First thing, Justin Amash, it's a picture of him. We're ready, in big, bold, white letters, for something new, for a government that secures our rights, for equality before the law, for an end to cronyism, for a government that fulfills its purpose and recognizes its limits, for practical approaches based on humility and trust of the people, for an honest, principled president who will defend the Constitution and put individuals first. Let's do this. Big blue donate button. Underneath that, join Justin. Block for your email address and zip code with a submit button. Underneath that, link to Facebook and Twitter. Contact us, privacy policy, terms of use, paid for by Amash for America Exploratory Committee, copyright 2020, all rights reserved. That's it. That's his whole website. There's no link. There's nowhere that I can go to see his principles or his platform. There is nothing here. There's nothing for me to look into. There's nothing for me to really compare him to other candidates. So if I want to learn anything about Amash, I have to, the new Amash, the newly Republican to independent to libertarian Amash, I'm going to have to go watch this debate tomorrow and completely base my opinion on him off of this debate. There's already some frustration.
I'm sorry for jumping in, but the debate is actually starting right now. It's not tomorrow.
Right.
I have the YouTube link. I have the YouTube link for you guys if you wanted to check it out.
So, right.
Yeah, I mean, you can hear it in the background.
Yeah. So that's happening now. There's already some frustrations and controversy around this particular debate. Adam Kokesh, who is not my first choice, but I consider him to be a pretty strong candidate for the presidential primary, has said that he won the last debate hosted by the LP of Kentucky. I don't know what his metric for victory on that was, but he feels that he won the last one, and he lost his spot in this one to Amash. I just don't want us to see – I don't want us to do the same thing we did 4 years ago, where we sidelined everyone who's poured blood, sweat, and tears into this movement for another Republican with name recognition. And it feels like we're going that way. The national convention was going to be this month. All that's kind of up in the air now with COVID-19. But if they do it online and go with the same dates, Amash has less than 1 month campaign for this candidacy, and I don't like – I mean, I'm one voice, I'm one vote. But it's frustrating to me to see that Jacob Hornberger, Vermin Supreme, Ken Armstrong, Joe Jorgensen, Dan Berman, Adam Kokesh. We've had so many strong candidates that have been pouring their own time, work, and money into this for so long to just have another high recognition Republican come in and possibly win the primary for that. One funny thing that did come out of this, I saw a Babylon Bee article the other day that said Justin Amash becomes first Libertarian member of Congress. It was hilarious until I realized it wasn't Babylon Bee, it was NBC, and this is actually our first Libertarian member of Congress. Yeah, that's my piece. That's how I feel about Amash. Joe?
Yep. And so with that, I think that illustrates what you and I both have said. It illustrates there's just a split in the Libertarian Party over Amash. There's not a split. Let me be clear here. There is not a split among the Libertarian Party itself. The party's not going to divide in half tomorrow. What there is that there is a division because of the situation that Amash has entered in. And so, like Joe, I want to reiterate a lot of what he has said, that we're not here to cause contention. If you decide to come in, or if you decide to join in and adopt libertarianism or jump into the Libertarian Party, we open you with all arms. That being said, the party does have a platform, and you will find out in subsequent episodes and former episodes, everybody can always have an issue with a platform one way or another. But the whole point is that was rooted in the principles of freedom and liberty, where the priority is the individual over the state, especially in regards to control. So with all that being said, I'll leave it with this. Jacob Hornberger has been a very vocal critic of Justin Amash, particularly with his policies and views and his voting record in Congress. So for Hornberger, what he seems to criticize Amash on is that for him, Amash is not libertarian enough. So to give you an example, I'll give you both Jacob's point of view and I'll give you Justin's point of view based off their own words. Jacob himself had criticized Justin and said that when the vote came for the subsequent stimulus bills that were passed in the wake of the coronavirus, Justin had only voted present. Why didn't he vote no? The other thing is that when Justin decided to vote for impeachment of Donald Trump, he voted for impeachment based off of Russia collusion. Why not any of the other things that Donald Trump has done that would be worthy of impeachment, such as, for say, his involvement in the Syrian war and such? You know, his use of military force without legislative approval, his unauthorized wars. Justin, on the other hand, has defended, and he gave a great interview on that 184 interview. I encourage every one of you who are listening to this and do listen to this to look up that 184 podcast and listen to Justin's own words. But he gives an account by account defense of why he did, and I have to say that his reasons were pretty valid overall. One of his major things was that the reason why he voted present was mainly because there were some things in the bill that he thought would do some good, but there were some things in the bill that he's like, there's no way. And so for him, one of it is that he did want to give relief to people who did lose their jobs, which may not be a libertarian thing, but he said for he himself, they lost their jobs through no fault of their own. So he believed that, giving them that temporary aid, at least to patch them over, he supported. What he disagreed with staunchly was the involvement of all the money going to big businesses, to small businesses, to lobbyists, to groups, to funding organizations, and he saw where that was coming from. So he was torn on that, so he voted present. Now, that in itself is not necessarily a pure libertarian. A pure libertarian, say, a stronger version of, well, even Ron Paul himself probably would have voted flat out no. But at least Justin gives a defense and an account of his views. So I give him the most respect for that. He seems to be fairly candid. But, we will give you the play-by-play action as the nomination process rolls on. So, Joe, did you want to take us on to our next topic now?
Right.
Or do you have anything else to
Arbery
add?
shooting. I'm good on Amash.
Cool.
So we can roll on to the next one. For those that have been following, and I am deeply sorry if I mispronounce his name, Ahmaud Arbery shooting. Now, to give background, because Joe, you said you hadn't been following this, a video surfaced literally a few days ago. And I will try to objectively describe the things in the video to the best of my ability. A white truck is rolling up. There is a man in the back of the truck. There is a black man jogging on the street. He goes to the right of the truck. Truck stops. He goes around the front. Suddenly, he and someone from out of the truck are wrestling over a shotgun. There's 3 shots fired, and the black man who was trying to get the shotgun away and punch him in the face falls dead on the ground. Now, the 2 men in the video, their account of it is that somebody had been breaking into houses in the neighborhood. This guy jogging looked like the suspect, so they followed him to question him. And it turned into a tussle. He attacked them, and they shot him. They claimed citizen's arrest, which is a thing in Georgia. I don't fully understand the law there. But the kicker is all this happened back in February, like February 23rd. And even though these men admit that they jumped into their truck, followed this man down the street, confronted him with weapons, and shot him dead, which they claim was in self-defense. There wasn't an investigation. They were not arrested. And this week, 2-3 days tops after this video surfaces and goes everywhere, suddenly the information comes out that the eldest of the 2 men, it's a father and son, eldest of the 2 men is a retired police officer in that county. He is suddenly charges are put out for him after 2 DAs rescue themselves from this. And it's pretty straightforward. There were no reported burglaries for 7 weeks prior to this, even though they said that's why they did it. It was a lynch mob. They ran this guy down because he looked like someone who had been breaking into houses in the neighborhoods, allegedly. He apparently had looked into the window of an under-construction property particular day. But they run him down. They jump out of the truck. This man is jogging, sees 2 guys coming at him with guns, tries to wrestle for the gun, and gets shot dead. And, you know, it's not a citizen's arrest, it's vigilante justice. But the one point that I do want to diverge from the common narrative is we keep hearing the word vigilantes is being thrown around. These guys took it upon themselves to chase this man down, and when it got ugly and they lost control of the situation, they shot him dead. Retired cop. I don't like the word vigilante justice specifically because the senior of the 2 men is a retired police officer, and because the only reason charges have been filed is because this video went public. To me, what this says, when no consequence comes to these men until the video comes out, until the entire world sees it, and then suddenly the DA's office is scrambling to contain it, and 2 DAs rescue themselves from it. It doesn't look like bad apples to me. It looks like a bad barrel. I don't believe that this retired officer, had such a poor understanding of his citizen's arrest law that he thought he was in the right. I think he had a perfectly good understanding of it, and I imagine that what he did was probably not dissimilar to how he did his job as a police officer. And I think the 2 DAs that rescued themselves probably know something about that. It's ugly. And the reason I want to diverge is from the vigilante narrative is because we're saying vigilante justice is a terrible thing. I don't hold that these men are vigilantes. I believe these men are part of the institution of criminal justice. He is a retired officer. He knows these DAs. He knows the local police force. He knows what he can get away with. Unfortunately for him, a video surfaced. I think vigilante justice is not the stain on the black community and the threat to the life of the black community. I think vigilante justice in this case is exactly what saved them, because this video was vigilante justice. You are not – these men have now been tried in the court of public opinion. There is no due process in the court of public opinion. There is no proper, fair, and speedy public trial. There is no innocent until proven guilty in the court of public opinion. It is not fair justice, but it is all that Arbery's family will ever get in these kinds of situations. I have to ask, if this is how this guy is acting when he is retired, what was he like as an officer? How many Arbery's have there been in his career as an officer, and in his career of knowing the kind of DAs that'll look the other way until suddenly there's a video that they just can't escape? This video being released to the public so that the public could draw their own conclusions and condemn these men is the only reason there will ever be a trial on this. Powers that be, the legitimate powers that be that have sworn an oath to protect and serve, were happy to sweep this under the rug and let this be some thug that was breaking into houses who got shot because he attacked the people that wanted to ask him questions. They were happy to bury this with that narrative, and now they can't. And we see these videos all the time now. It's cop watching. Record the police. We encourage it now. Record the police, record the police, record the police. If you're being questioned, don't just record them. Live stream it. If you know you're in the right, live stream it. Because you can't just go back and delete a live stream. There's witnesses. It makes me reflect back on the 60s when the Black Panthers started cop watching, but they weren't carrying cameras, they were carrying guns. It was a deterrence factor. It was a means of keeping the LAPD from carrying out acts of police brutality in their neighborhoods. Because no matter how corrupt you are, it's not worth getting shot. We see it all the time. I thought he had a weapon. I feared for my life. It's a very different conversation. We don't see that when you see pictures of the Black Panthers standing up, lined up with AR-15s and Ruger Mini 14s. When there's actually a weapon, no one gets shot. Because you can clearly see, if I fuck with this guy, I'm going to die. If I fuck with this line of 15 or 16 or 20 or 100 armed Black Panthers, I am going to get shot. So I'm not going to fuck with them. When it's one guy, I don't think I'm being recorded, he's running away, I feared for my life. Unfortunately, I think we're at a time where until the police forces and the Justice Department do what needs to be done to regain the good faith and confidence of the American people, vigilante justice is the only thing the black community can rely on. Joe, I know you're in the dark on this one. You can only really comment on my thoughts and my description of the events, and I was kind of all over the place. I didn't really have these thoughts put together going into this show. Do you have any comment?
Yes, actually I do. I've got a question for you. And this is a question that is not to put you on the spot, Joe. This is more of a question of what do we think as libertarians should be the right policy for this? So let's take this into a broader context. What you've just touched on is a personal, individual situation that is really at the heart of a lot of contention that's going on in what I would call the underground reality today. So on Main Street, there is the official view especially among a lot of the conservative and suburbanites, that racism is a thing of the past. However, to me, what it sounds like, and again, like you pointed out, these two men will now be judged in the court of public opinion. What it sounds like is that this was racial profiling. They probably saw this man. He was out at night. He was black. They were like, oh, well, we've had some burglars, and the suspect was black. He's black. He must be the guy because he's the only one out. Well, let's take justice into our own hands and kill him. But in light of this, I think that this has been one of the major reasons that we've had the creation of the Department of Justice, especially on the federal level, to launch investigations into unfair conduct and practices that certain police officers may have undergone, or court systems and such that may have had some prejudicial views against minorities. And so the Department of Justice is kind of acting as a check on that. Libertarians today, and I mean libertarians always have always been very skeptical and very suspicious of federal government power, especially federal government overreach in state and local affairs. For my question to you is, do you think that the Department of Justice the creation of the Department of Justice has been justified in the wake of these kinds of events going on, that basically this gives an argument for certain groups, especially minorities, to say, see, this is why we need a Department of Justice so they can investigate these matters?
It's a classic question of we need to appoint someone to oversee the authorities, but who's overseeing the overseers, and then who's overseeing those overseers?
Mm-hmm.
We need an unbiased police force so that we don't have lynch mobs running around, because that's exactly what this was. It's so easy to draw simple comparisons to the stories that we would read about in To Kill a Mockingbird in these books growing up, and in old news articles of, this white girl said that he raped her, so now we're going to go out and we're going to find him, and we're just going to talk to him, and now he's hanging from a tree. There's been somebody breaking into houses in our neighborhood, supposedly, even though there was one break-in reported 7 weeks ago, but whatever. There's been some break-ins. We're just going to go and we're just going to talk to him, and now he's bleeding out in the middle of the street. It was a lynch mob. Now we need an unbiased police force so that we don't have lynch mobs, but now it's the police doing the lynching. And now it's the DAs looking the other way on the lynching. And it's not easy. It's not hard to look at the Department of Justice and start seeing their own controversies and their own cover-ups. You just can't weed out evil with bureaucracy. It does not work.
So in other words,
the answer is we need more power in the hands of the people, not less. This man shouldn't be scared to carry a weapon. We've seen it 1,000 times. We pass more and more gun control. And the only people that ever suffer for this gun control, the only people that ever answer for it, seem to be the black community. I know multiple gun owners, multiple black gun owners, that some of them have even gone through the process. In North Carolina, we don't have constitutional carry. You have to get a permit. Many of them have actually gone through this process and gotten their concealed carry permit. It's a few $100s worth of process. It can take 6 months, and they don't carry. They're scared to. They're more afraid of what a police officer is going to do to an armed black man than what a potential attacker is going to do to an unarmed one. As a gun owner, I mean, I've talked to you about it before, Joe. It is a huge frustration to me that we, the Second Amendment, freedom movement, whatever you want to call us, the gun rights activists, have left the black community behind when they have been the specific target of so many gun control laws in the past. And I'm trying to do my part in trying to talk to people I know and stir up some black gun rights activism in my area. But it's one thing for me to convince you to go to an open carry rally where there are 16 or 17 of us with AR-15s. Nobody's getting shot at that. Nobody's getting tear gassed at that. No cop is going to come over and fuck with us when we've got that much firepower. but I can't be with you out on the street when you're concealed carrying, and now that officer wants to talk to you. And when you end up being Philando Castile, you were legally carrying, but the cop's an idiot and he shot you anyway. Because he said, give me your wallet, don't reach for your gun. Oh no, he's reaching for the gun when he reached for his wallet. I can't ask people I know to risk their own lives for this, because it's not me risking my life. I carry all the time. Back when I was a bouncer, I once had to break up a fight at an IHOP I didn't even work at 4 in the morning after I got off work. I was carrying, and I was grabbing people at a restaurant I did not work at. I had to break up this fight. I was grabbing people. I was throwing them through the door, slamming the door behind them, locking it, while somebody else was calling the police, and I had to speak to an officer and explain, I grabbed people by the scruff of their neck and I threw them outside of the door while carrying a gun at a bar I don't work at, or at a restaurant I don't work at. I didn't get shot. I don't even remember if he took my name down. I never got a phone call. I didn't get charged with anything. I have never once thought that telling an officer I had a gun on me was going to get me shot. I feel like I'm 100 years too late to try to help this community, because I can't assume that risk for them. I can rant about that all day. I'm going to stop now. That's my piece on it. We have to privatize security again, and we have to privatize security for the people that need it, because socializing security and socializing justice has not worked.
So when you say privatizing security, do you mean that we should have private police forces?
That's a thought, but what I really mean is we need to bring it back to grassroots. I can provide my own defense.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there's an old saying that says it's better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6. And unfortunately, what happened to this young man is tragic. I think you touched on a good point about it, is that a lot of these types of instances, there's no doubt that there's validity to the argument that there's injustice that goes on inside the court system, inside the police force and such. And so what they have said is saying, see, this action of government is not working for us because the actors and the players inside this local government are, prejudiced. So therefore, we need an act from a higher up power, a federal bureaucracy, to control these actors and players on the local levels. However, I'd like to point out that despite the level of bureaucracy that is involved in the Department of Justice today, they were unable to save this young man's life. So all government can do is be reactionary. Government is never proactive, and what this man needed to have his life saved was a proactive response. The only people that are going to be proactive is the people out on the streets, because we have to. And I think you touched a good part on it, Joe, was that this is the argument that we need to expand gun ownership for everybody, so that everybody has the right to protect themselves no matter what.
Exactly.
So how much time do we have left?
So that's my piece on that. Well, I don't know where we're at on time. That's your ballpark. You're the one monitoring.
Let me take a look.
That's my piece on Arbery. We've gone over Amash. Whatever time we have left, let's dive into the economics. We're at 14.7% unemployment now?
Yes, that's correct. And under the U6 unemployment rate, and I'll talk about those in just a second, we're at 22.8. So the common reported unemployment statistic is what is called the U3. There's actually 6 measurements of unemployment, each that are more broader in scope as the higher numbers you get. U6 is the broadest measure of unemployment. It tries to take into account people who have become underemployed, so they're basically working less hours, people who have given up and looking for work. They don't have a job. They're still unemployed. They just no longer counted in other unemployment statistics because they have, quote, left the labor force, unquote. Well, if they've left the labor force, it's because they don't have a job. So, and by all measures, the U6 unemployment rate I consider to be the most accurate. And to give you a frame of reference, before the coronavirus crisis took place, the U6 unemployment rate was hovering around 7%. Now it's at 23%. And back in the 1930s, during the Great Depression, that rate was around 30 to 35. So we are on our way to the Great Depression. And I have been saying this in the past couple of times that, what we are being told by the economic and fiscal experts under the Trump administration is that they are expecting what is called a V-shaped recovery in our economy. So they're expecting a quick bounce back. I'm going to give you guys a lesson about politicians and bureaucrats in the wake of crisis. Whenever there is a crisis that goes on, that is the least likely that your politicians and bureaucrats are telling you the truth. They're more than likely lying to you, or they're outright deceiving you, and what they're telling you is what they want, not what the reality is. So when Steven Mnuchin came out and said, well, we expect a sharp recovery of the economy in the third quarter, what he's saying is that he wants a sharp recovery in the third quarter. Why? Because that's Donald Trump's election. Donald Trump wants a sharp recovery because he's running against Joe Biden. And if the economy's bad, he might get blamed for it. And if he might get blamed for it, well, then he gets hurt politically for it, and he may not win the presidential election. So politicians' number one rule, the number one priority to a politician is to get elected. Its number two priority is to get reelected. You, the people, you come dead last. So, this whole coronavirus shutdown has completely destroyed capital growth in our economy. And I'll touch on this without trying to go too wonkish on this. There was a phenomena that triggered during the Great Depression and the Great Recession. It hasn't happened in the United States anytime other than the Great Depression and Great Recession. That I think is one of the primary reasons why we stayed and languished in depression, and why our recession and the recovery from the Great Recession was so weak. And it's a phenomenon called capital consumption. And what that means is essentially we did not have enough wealth to reinvest in the tools, machinery, and equipment and developed land that we use to increase our production. So to give you an example, tractors. A tractor by itself is useless. It's a worthless vehicle to use for transportation. But when we put the tractor in the hands of a farmer, why that tractor is actually quite valuable, because it allows the farmer to create more food than he otherwise would have been able to create with his bare hands. The same is true with any kind of tool. Computers is another way of doing it. And so essentially what happens is that during the Great Depression on and off for about 10 years, from 1930 to 1944, we were actually investing less money in those kinds of goods. They're called capital goods, where we get the root word of capital for capitalism from. We were investing less money. We were burning cash. And the reason why we were burning that cash, using up those goods, is because we were trying to meet the needs of the consumer. So in order to purchase and spend on capital goods, we have to use and purchase less of consumer goods or produce less consumer goods. So that way, when the capital goods are being created, once they're created, they're able to produce more consumer goods for us, and we're able to consume more than we otherwise would have been. But we weren't able to do that. Why? Well, I believe that the major reason why is because the government was spending a lot of the wealth during that time, particularly after the Great Recession. During the Great Depression, government spending increased by 33%. Whenever the government spends a dollar, it must first take that dollar and extract it from the private sector. And it doesn't matter if it does it through taxes or through borrowing, it must take that money from the private sector and use it. Once that dollar's value is used up, it's worthless. Everything else is just higher prices once it gets recycled in. And I think that's exactly what was being done, was that under the Hoover and later FDR administrations, they had increased federal spending, and state and local spendings were also increased during that time somewhat. And that was kind of hurting business investment. It basically did an effect in economics called crowding out. So they crowded out business investment. And what the government spends money on is not capital goods. If they ever did spend money on capital goods, it is for government purposes of use, such as war. Well, nobody can drive a tank to work. Nobody can eat a missile. Nobody can fly an F-35 fighter jet on a round-trip ticket from Atlanta to New York and back. Military goods are worthless economically. They do zero good. And in the process, they destroy our ability to produce the real goods, the real tools, the real capacity to better our lives. So that has been going on. So what does that have to do with today? Well, I took a measurement of what our capital formation was in the quarter one of 2020 based off the results, and they plummeted. And that's to be expected because of the coronavirus outbreak and the government shutdowns of the economy. They plummeted to levels that we have not seen since 2008. They will most likely, it's all but a given that they will go negative in the second quarter, which means we will be undergoing capital consumption again, which means that we are not going to have that V-shaped economic recovery that the economic figureheads at the top are promising us. They're outright lying to you, and I think that they know that there's not going to be a strong recovery. We are looking at a sharp recession of the likes of 2008, if not an outright depression, where it will seem like for time and time on end, year after year, we're just not able to get back to where we were. And unfortunately, what I think is that there's going to be a divide among the populace. There's going to be some people that will rightfully blame the government shutdown for the economic crisis and say, God, if the government never shut us down, we would never have been in this situation to begin with. And there are going to be supporters of the government shutdown that said they're going to argue in two ways. They're going to say, one, businesses would have shut down anyway because it was unsafe, which then you can counter with the argument, if that's true, why enforce the shutdown through government force since businesses were going to do it voluntarily? Answer is they weren't going to shut down, or not enough of them anyway. And then the second thing that they will argue is they will just shrug it off and say, well, if, we didn't shut it down, millions of people were going to die. So we saved everybody's life, and we're just going to have to deal with this. And in the process, they're not going to calculate the number of deaths that are going to occur from this economic depression. The statistic in the United States is that for every 1% increase in unemployment, there is an increase of, and I'm looking this up right now, there should be at least a 1,500 increase in the number of deaths. Yeah, there seems to be about a 1,500 increase in the number of deaths. So if you calculate that the unemployment rate using the U6 measurements have increased by 16%, well then if you take that and multiply that number by 1,500, that is actually going to result in the amount of deaths of about more or less 24,000 people dead. Now, we can say, but 70,000 people died from the coronavirus. Therefore, we saved 46,000 people's lives. Well, there's two things with that. One is that under scenario one, that 24,000 people dead, it does not count the other 329 million people who have lost a good bit of their income and are now poor and impoverished. And two, that is based off of current unemployment statistics. Those unemployment numbers will languish that high for years to come. This is not going anywhere anytime soon. The unemployment numbers are going to stay stubbornly high for a long time. Now, I'm not saying they're going to stay at like 20 to 30% forever, but I would say that they will stay prolongedly over 10% unemployment for the next 3 to 5 years. And if you do that and run the math, you're going to find that there will be tens of thousands of people dead that otherwise wouldn't have died every single year. And we've got to think about that. So as Joe Swiggett has often said, we're not saving lives, we're trading lives. And so the answer is, do you want to be in a situation where you're free, or do you want to be in a situation where you think that the government is saving your life? You pick, and you decide. That's all that I've got. Joe, do you have any last thoughts?
I would like to touch on that. And you mentioned that with the rising unemployment, you get rising deaths. And it's a strange number to throw out. It's a strange statistic to throw out because people don't just die of poor. Let's throw some numbers out there that make that a little bit more real. The life expectancy difference between the richest Americans and the poorest Americans is about 15 years. If you're in that lowest income bracket, you're going to die 15 years before that person in the top 10%. Crime statistics. If you are in the lowest income bracket, you are twice as likely to be a victim of violent crime than the next bracket up. That number translates directly to our rape statistic, our sexual assault statistic. If you are a woman in the lowest income bracket, you are twice as likely to suffer a rape. You are twice as likely to be raped than a woman in the next income bracket up from you. And this is what we are condemning people to. Suicides. We're seeing rising suicides. We're seeing that more from isolation. We think suicide is a miserably difficult thing to research. There's not the evidence you would think. There's not the positive correlation you would expect to see between poverty and suicide. Interestingly enough, there's more evidence supporting that being rich leads to suicide. But we're seeing estimates that suggest that the quarantine itself, the isolation, is going to drive some people over the edge. Malnutrition and health concerns. If you are in that lowest income bracket, if you are impoverished, food deserts, eating healthy is expensive. There's a deal on Domino's right now. Two or more large two-topping pizzas, each priced at $9.99. $20 right there, $20. There are 2,269 calories in a large Domino's pepperoni pizza. You're talking about 4,500 calories for $20 versus what that same money, how many calories is that same money going to buy you at a grocery store? Which of those can you feed your kids on easier? If you're poor, you don't eat as well. We've seen that. That's one of the reasons you're going to die 15 years earlier. There's a myriad of reasons that being poor leads to an earlier death. You can't afford the health care. You can't afford the proactive efforts of a gym membership. You can't afford the healthier eating. You can't afford to live in the nice neighborhood where you're less likely to get shot, stabbed, murdered, or raped. Joe said it. It's become a motto of mine in these last 2 months. We're not saving lives. We're trading them. We are condemning people to deaths of other causes so long as it looks like we are taking this seriously in the months leading up to this election. And that's what I got on that.
So, guys, thank you for tuning in. I think that this will do for our airing for tonight. So in the next segment that we will cover, one of the things I want to go over is the LP presidential debate in Kentucky. Particularly, I want to go over Justin Amash's entrance, and I'll give you some feedback on his performance and how I think he did and some of the topics that they went over and such, as well as the other candidates in particular. But I think the real gauge is that it seems to me that the consensus is now is that this is Justin's race to lose, so it's in his hands. He's either going to drop the ball or he's going to carry it and run for the touchdown. Joe, what else did you want to cover?
Well, our very first call-in, also Joe from Montana, wanted to talk about COVID-19, and we need to go there. It is something that in our practice runs to this show, we always hit on because we actually started this show right about when the quarantine took off, and that was the big news. And in our pre-recordings, we've touched on, we need to talk about this, we need to talk about this. It's the hot topic, Joe. It's been requested. Next week, we need to dive in on COVID-19.
I'd like to add a little thing at the very end. I am not a host to the show. I just wanted to say that I'm running the board in the background and acting as a kind of a coach. So I think it's a very fair thing for me to say right now. First of all, please follow this show if you like what you're hearing, and we'll be able to give you social media and emails that you can call in, write in, and be part of this process. And I am not a libertarian, and a lot of these views are not views that reflect upon me. And you may hear that a lot on the show, that the views in the show will not necessarily reflect everyone else's views. So keep that in mind when you listen. That's a very libertarian thought, though I am not a libertarian. So please follow the show and keep tuned for more ways to add to the show, do social media and such. I hope you guys don't mind my jumping in and saying that, because I do want your show to...
No, that's all right.
No.
I do want your show to...
And I would like to say, don't say your name, I would like to say one thing on that. Our mysterious friend who just chimed in, who we are not going to identify, has stated she is not a libertarian. She's also the one who has set this up, walked us through it, and we're probably at about the 20th or 30th hour of libertarian bullshit that this poor woman has had to put up with. Special thanks to her.
I live with it, so thank you.
But
thank
for
you.
now,
no,
you
I
can
do
reach
think
us.
that all voices have a place to be heard. Go ahead, Joe. Sorry.
No, sorry. I was trying to end this on the top note. But for now, if you do have questions or topics or comments, you can reach us at antifederalistradio@gmail.com.
We, the members of the Libertarian Party, challenge the cult of the omnipotent state and defend the rights of the individual.
Join us again next time.